Okay, so let's start with this very offensive title that I couldn't water down anymore. So first of all, thanks for being here. I'll just go through a little intro, talk a little bit about what you can expect to get from this, and prepare a little bit. And let's go into it. Let's see here. So first of all, I'm Jussi. Very nice to meet you. So I'm an art director right now, and I work at PUBG Studios. Before this, I did environment art at a handful of companies, and it's always been sort of focused on environment art until becoming an art director. Before that, I was a teacher. So I was teaching in public schools and in game schools. And in terms of video games, I have a lot of passion for them. So myself, I worked on these. So I worked on 2 Gears of War titles with Splash Damage and Microsoft, and then Hunt Showdown with Crytek. And then there are these 3 other ones, Star Citizen and Off the Grid, and the current project that I have, which technically they're not all out there yet, but I hope one day that they will be. So this won't really be a talk about art pipelines or art tech or things that are directly applicable, which is a bit weird, of course. But if you want to know a little bit more about that side of me, feel free to go on my ArtStation and click through whatever images you find. So you see mostly my focus on there will be, levels and environments and props and, lighting and level design and materials. But that's not the topic of the day. I'm here to talk about, despite the very, call it a offensive title, which I now kind of laugh at a little bit. I'm here to talk about this guy. So I'm here to talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is what really is going on in the games industry. Because I think everyone kind of has taken note that it's a little bumpy. It's a little unpredictable. There are a lot of layoffs and there are product cancellations. And I think everyone, with a bit of connections should know someone personally affected by it. And it's a topic that you can't really address directly. It's really too late to change what has happened, or go into specifics of what we can do right now. There's not really a talk about that. But I have some experience from my position as an art director, where I kind of work at a very sort of a connection point between creatives, so artists and other developers, and publishers, so the people who fund the games and people who create projects and how they understand the projects. And from my experience doing that for the last 3 years, and from my general experience working in the games industry for 10 years now, I have some things that I want to talk about, and I find that the best way to do that is with you. So here's my opening statement. I think that the way the games industry works is about to pivot. And I want to talk a little bit about that and give you some perspective on what I think the change will look like. And not just talk about the change, but also talk about, how does it work right now and why is that about the change. And after that, I also want to address that the way we are heading right now, our trajectory for games, is actually not helping us as creative individuals. So especially for someone trying to find their way as an artist and, making up their own mind about what they like and having their own opinions, the way things are working right now, that's actually quite hard. And that's something that, not just something we shouldn't change, but from my view on things, it has to change. And that's also part of the topic for this presentation. So let's jump to the final slide of this presentation. And I'll just tell you right now what the final slide will be, so then we can work our way up to it. And the final slide of this presentation will say, game development budgets are about to shrink. So we're about to spend less money on making games. And it means that we will need less specialists than before. So we'll need people who have, one additional skill in the tool belt. So if you know a little bit of lighting, or a little bit of level design, or if you can model and texture and do level art, that's going to be quite helpful, because we will have smaller teams and we will have simpler pipelines to basically turn things around faster and not, spend as much time that we do right now on making games. And the second part is that we will need to focus more on creative development. So right now, the industry is focused on scale, like making things large and making things really high quality. And we will need to focus less on that. And we're going to need a generally bigger variety and the kind of projects that are going on out there. So that's the final slide of the presentation. And right now, it shouldn't make that much sense to you. So let's work back up to it. And here's a little bit of a disclaimer. If you're here right now, like Karim said, it means you're pretty hardcore. You came to a non-art pipeline talk, and it means on some level you're interested in things beyond polygons and textures, which I think is good. But that said, this presentation is information heavy, so that we have to go through a lot of things to really understand simple things. And for that reason, I'll try to refer back to the main topic at various times. But it is a very information-heavy presentation. So what I would encourage is, take down questions that you have, write them down, put them in the chat. I'm not looking at the chat directly, but I will once I'm done. And I'd be happy to, discuss some of the points, go through things in more detail, and to generally come back to all the things that I go through and discuss them at the end of this. So I've split this into 3 parts. So first we'll talk about the games industry and the games business. And then we'll talk about something I call creative inertia. And at last, we'll talk about what does it mean that I say that we are products, or you, or we. I count all of us in this, and why we shouldn't be. So here we go. So the first part is called the games industry and the games business. And I make a presumption that these are 2 different things. So to get into these topics, really, the first thing we have to understand is art and money. So in creative endeavors, there are really 2 forces that make things happen. And that's art, our power to create things, and it's money, the thing we created for. Art for free doesn't work. So to really understand, how the industry works, we have to actually examine both of those forces and why they make things happen and how. And the question is well, why are we talking about money now? Of course we're not really. What we're talking about is to understand how games get made. You need to understand more than just, the pipelines. You also need to understand, how do they get out there? How do they end up on your PS5? How do they end up on Steam? Because that's the other side of the games business that I think a lot of people could use to know a little bit more about, and it'll help you understand the big picture once you sort of see these things. And in games, these 2 things, these 2 so-called forces, they are the publisher and the developer. So the people who make the game and the people who sell the game. So very topically relevant to what's been going on lately, we need to talk about what is an acquisition. When someone acquires a studio, that's something we have all heard. But to understand what really happens, it's basically like this. So an acquisition is when the publisher and the developer, they go from working very, very horizontally. So they both hold equal power. The publisher says, can you do this? And the developer will say, maybe. And the developer will say, can we have more time? And the publisher will say, maybe. So it's quite an even relationship. And an acquisition is going from that relationship being level to it being vertical. That's basically when the publisher is in charge of the developer. So what you get there is basically you change the dynamic between how art and money works. And that's important to know because it's the trend that we've seen in the games industry for the last, even I would say, 25 years. And it explains a lot of how games get made and what specific things happen meanwhile. So we're already at the too much text point. Let's look at some graphics. This is what acquisitions really mean. So if you want to understand, the state of game development in our day and age, this very nice pie chart, which I found on Reddit and didn't manage to credit here, but I think I should. kind of gives you a little look at, exactly where do the decision making happens, like within each studio. So you see here that Microsoft, you should see a bunch of familiar logos here, everything from Blizzard to ZeniMax to Arcane Studios to Obsidian to Treyarch and Bethesda and Roundhouse, and that they all essentially, belong within the same structure. And for Take-Two, it would be the same. So we know Take-Two mostly for Rockstar games. But I think this chart is a little out of date because there's a few I don't even see on here. And you can see in general, Embracer is, quite a known name these days. And if you want to really understand, how this development and publisher relationship works, this chart exemplifies that pretty clearly, that the same people are, often in charge of quite a lot of developers. So let's look at what has really happened and what's the effect of an acquisition. So, games didn't always used to be made this way, but when the publishers start to directly, not just work with, but own the developers, what happens is that the games industry joins the games business. So, like us here in this call, I think we're mostly creative people. We like to think in colors and shapes, and we don't like to think in project management or, production terms or things like that. But when the studios that we work for, like directly now don't just work with, but work for the publishing side of the industry, what we start to see is different rules for how things happen. And different rules means things that, like the risks we take as developers, the publishers inherit those risks. And all of the benefits of having, a publisher backing you, we also get them too. So it's quite balanced. Some things are more restrictive, some things are more easy. And one thing is that there's a lot more potential with a good publisher. Like let's be honest. There's a lot more potential. For instance, if you have a good producer or a publisher, what it means is you can make bigger teams. So the direct connection to the people funding you means that now, instead of the 20 people that you had scrambled together for your project, the publisher can actually get you another 10 from another project that they have and help you out. And when you need money, and that would be for licenses or moving an office or company parties, whatever it would be, the publisher is much more flexible in giving you that. And if things go right, like the publisher can actually give you a lot of creative freedom as well, and say we deal with the business and you guys deal with the game. And there's often better market analysis. So like publishers will say, oh, we shouldn't do this right now because there are 10 competitors to this game, and they really help on making those kind of decisions for like what will make sense when we sell it, make them more obvious early on in production. But hold on, it's already time to go back to the main topic. Why are we talking about this at all? Like, why is money relevant to any of this stuff? And the reason for that is that money actually demands. Well, it impacts the demand for art, like what people are willing to buy and what people are interested in buying. It ends up affecting, what art gets made. So, for instance, if a church gets built, it's because the Pope wanted it. If a portrait gets painted, it's because someone wanted to be displayed. So, art is not always just made for the sake of it. Often, it has a sponsor, which is why we need to understand it and discuss it. And because of the relationship between the people who pay and the people who paint, money also impacts the execution of the art, at least indirectly. That's why we're kind of going through the topic. So let's continue. Now I want to jump ahead to a hypothetical scenario that I think would have occurred sometime 15 to 20 years ago. A publisher says to a developer, I have a great idea. And he says, right now, first-person shooters and all shooters, they're selling like hotcakes. If you guys make a shooter game, I'm confident that I can sell that shooter game. And we're going to make money at the end of it. So what do you think? And, to be fair to the publishers in that case, it was a great idea. Publishers help identify good market opportunities. That is indeed what they do best. And they help, the developers focus on things that will all keep us afloat. But there's just one problem with that, once the publishers start to directly influence or curate the amount of what kind of games get made. And that problem, I'll ask a question about it. So which game am I thinking about? There's the box art of the game. There's a guy, and he has a gun, and the gun is pointing up. As you can see here, there's a lot of people who've been having this conversation, specifically about the topic of shooters. And to be fair, a lot of these shooters are great, except the GoldenEye remake. That's a terrible shooter. Okay, let's do one more. So, which game am I thinking of? So, it's an open world game, but the story is linear, and you can teleport to places on the map that you click on. And this game was advertised as having a 20-hour story campaign. Ta-da! So, there's a bit of a subtle point here that I'm trying to make, which is that for the best ways that publishing works, which is taking the potential of a team, looking at what's possible, and finding out what can we do. There's only one problem, which is that creativity doesn't really work like that. So despite that publishers are great at maximizing profits, using resources well, identifying trends, and being fast to market, there's just one slight problem, which is that this approach isn't really compatible with art and culture. Art and culture is a lot more chaotic and doesn't really work to scale in this sense. So let's get back to the main topic. Publishers being in charge of game projects is amazing for productivity, but it's bad for diversity. So, profits, of course, went up. So the reason that we even have a games industry is because of this, that we worked our way into a place where we're not just a bunch of people sitting in basements and garages working on games solo, but the creative merits of what we're doing, what we can see over the last 20 years is that games are starting to kind of look a little bit the same and work a little bit the same, which brings us to part 2 of this presentation called Creative Inertia and Its Consequences. And I put an extra strong color here to make sure that people don't fall asleep in the middle of the talk. So what is creative inertia? It is when you're a creative individual, like that's truly what you are. You like to make things and you have a lot of ideas and you really want to, share them with the world. So what you do is you go to a publisher with your idea, and then the publisher tells you this: you want to make a game about a naughty goose where you steal the keys from some guy and then he falls on his ass and you honk and you flap your wings, and that's your game idea. And he's not really convinced. The only problem is that was an amazing idea. So often, like, the ways that we can present things to people who are directly in charge of scrutinizing the ideas, it's quite difficult to get that across. And creative inertia is basically what happens when there is too little risk and too much scrutiny. So when the ideas that you as a creative person are evaluated by someone whose job it is to essentially avoid risk, and you end up agreeing on simpler ideas together. Let's just make a shooter. So what you get over time is you get homogeneity. So things start to look the same. We agree on safe ideas. We agree on safe bets. We don't really push ourselves to the realm of, well, what could we do if we did this or if we did that? And too many similar looking games leads to market saturation. So there are 13 Assassin's Creed games, and just as an example for this, that it's hard to keep up. Even people who love the series often can't keep up with the amount and simply even in the franchise, all the games that come out. So what happens is when the games start to be too similar, and we see that there are trouble to stand out. What happens is, and this has happened now since 2010, around that time, a bit earlier, is that we start to focus on size and scope with 2 C's. I can see here: size, scope and quality. So, look, guys, we may be similar to the competition, but we're going to be bigger and we're going to be better than the competition. Because, like in production terms, size and quality, that's quantifiable. So, better pixels and more polygons, and a larger game world and a longer game time. And of course, that's actually perfect, because if you're a publisher, scaling, that's one of the things you do best. Like I said, let's just say we work for one studio and our publisher tells us, look, we're going to give you this whole other studio as well to help you make this game massive. We can really, really help you with that. It's one of the things that are really, really good when you have a publisher, that scaling up and, adding to what you currently have. That's one of the things that they do best. And what we see here is around 2010, we see the birth of AAA. So you all know AAA as a term, and developers didn't make this up. We didn't make up AAA. That's a term that was made to basically explain to people just the sheer quality that you could expect from their next title. And not just the quality, but the size and the length and the complexity and the tech. And, if you ask anyone what is AAA, they don't quite know. It's if you ask 5 people what AAA is, you get 8 opinions, But what we can agree is that AAA is certainly something in this constellation. It's an amalgamation of a lot of funding, big teams, a lot of features, and these buzzwords that we have come to learn. And another focus that really happens, with AAA, is AAA really puts a focus on the graphics. So what happens is, of course, we over time we see IPs really flourish. So there are a lot of development within IPs, and there are less projects taking risks over time, which means we have less creative freedom, but we see a lot more technical freedom. So to support these open world games with graphics that all compete against each other to be the best, we see an insane explosion of the development pipelines. So this would have been, over the last 10 to 15 years, just the amount of complexity and finesse that has gone into art creation. And if you remember, art creation used to be grab a photograph from the internet and slap it on a polygon. It's quite in a different place now. And what we see as well is that the profession of game development becomes very technical, because we have to keep up quite a lot with all of the demands for both things to work in size and scale and scope, but also the quality, which we're always pushing. So it's time to go back to the topic of, technical advances in the profession are great. And to be very honest, art and technology or science, they're old friends. So essentially all art ever has had a very close relationship with technology. So, the age of Impressionism was brought on by being able to put your paint on a little board and go outside with it, and you didn't always have to paint in the studio. And there's nothing wrong with focusing on how you make art and, always improving it. But I'm not sure if we have focused on making the tech work for us for the right reasons. So what we do over the last 15 years especially, we start to perfect the formula of how to make a game. And we really go into an alchemy level of understanding game pipelines. And not just do the pipelines get better, but the accessibility of the pipelines themselves increases a lot. So when I got into game dev, if you wanted to learn 3ds Max, you had to get this book. And if you wanted to learn Unreal, you had to buy that book. And if you wanted to sculpt in ZBrush, you had to, there was a really good course on I think it was Gnomon Workshop at the time. But we can see that over time, the knowledge of game pipelines and game tech and, understanding the technical side of it with polycount and things like even universities offering courses and lately, the last 10 years of ArtStation, understanding how games are made, it went from tribal knowledge, which would, be 5 people in the world, you'd have, John Carmack and his kind of, like competitors at the time, like finding out how a normal map works and how bump mapping works and how ray marching works. And now those things are so accessible that they teach you that in university even. And so, don't get me wrong, detailed graphics are amazing. I mean, as artists, like there's nothing you love more than being able to make prettier things, especially with computers, because computers are, awfully limiting things when it comes to how we work. But we have to look at, like, these changes inside the industry. What does it change outside of the industry? And, meanwhile, outside of the industry, the world changes as well. So in 2014, we are introduced to ArtStation with, even more visibility and accessibility on game creation. And not just that, but this is right at the time when all of the industry is booming, so there are a lot of available jobs. And in general, like the idea that you can become a game developer, it becomes kind of a mainstream thing. So it becomes essentially a viable career choice to become a games developer. So it's a bit like, becoming an electrician or becoming a pharmacist. This very, almost like black magic esoteric trade. It's now something that we can say we know how to do it and we know how to teach it. And, that's essentially a viable career choice. But we have to go back to Hagrid. And Hagrid wants to ask if you know what happens reliably every 5 minutes. Every 5 minutes, someone tells you how to get into the games industry. And it's really easy. You just need to do this. You need to have, 5 good pieces on ArtStation. You need to have 1 good material, 1 good environment with lighting. And, I'm also one of the people who've been teaching this. I was teaching this in the games course that I was hosting at the time. And we are all right. It is easy to get into the games industry. Like we can break it down to the point where we can go to someone and say, this portfolio will make it and this one will not. There are very clear technical criteria for this. Just add water, essentially. So let's just stop for a moment there. Am I saying that helping people getting into the industry is bad? No, not at all. What I'm saying is that how easy it is and how simple it has become in a way, it's a sign of standardization. And when art and culture get standardized, as we looked at earlier in the presentation, when it comes to the ideas being standardized, it needs examination. And let's examine it. For the most part, publishers are involved in creative decisions. And, knowing publishers don't like to do that, they still are. And many games start to look and feel the same. Projects drastically increase in size and scale. And quality and scope and size, these become increasing priorities. And there is a tremendous need to hire new talent. So myself, I was hired, in one of these waves where the industry was expanding. So I have benefited from this too. But what we are seeing as well is the game art portfolios are also becoming standardized. So now people are aspiring to do the same things, to join the industry. And then we have to ask the question, and I do like to use PowerPoint's effects here, as you can see, is the industry going to maintain the same standard? So what we are now doing, what we all think we're supposed to be doing, do we trust industry to be able to continue to support that? So this is now we're coming back to the elephant in the room, and we're going into the last part of this presentation, which is called why you are a product and why you shouldn't be. And I can explain a little bit what that means. So let's talk about what we are a product of. What really what makes our very curated understanding of game art. So what we know for a fact is that when we join a team, we always expect that, pushing our own ideas through, it'll be hard. And that, like in terms of deciding on what the game should be and contributing and coming with our own ideas, we just know this is difficult. And we also know that, people are always hiring, teams are always growing, and to some extent, like we use this as both incentive to apply and to be very specific in how we approach the idea of game development. So we know that it's possible to get in. And of course, we know that what's important to teams is, doing a lot, doing, high quality, and that, like every studio wants to be the best in like these like very measurable categories. And of course, what this becomes the expectations for the portfolios that we make, because we know that to fit in, not addressing the facts that surmount to what the industry works like, it won't get us anywhere. So we try to conform. And to be honest, that for the games industry to become what it is today, like it has been necessary to do it this way. Very clear and limited expectations. It's been beneficial. So, and not just beneficial for people hiring, but also for people applying. So, if you know that Ubisoft are hiring 100 people, you want to make it easy for them to pick you. And now, let's discuss why shouldn't we be? Why shouldn't we let these ideas curate us? And the reason for that is, now we've talked about the current trajectory of how the industry is going and how things work and how things have been basically developing for, the last 20 to 25 years. And I suspect that a few things are about to change. So from all of this exposition, I now come to the actual interesting part, I hope, of this presentation. So, first of all, we have to go back 15 years in time and look at this headline from 2009, when Yves Guillemot, Ubisoft CEO, still, and at the time as well, he predicts that the next generation of games to be developed will cost a whooping $60 million. So like that's more than already. He says 60 is more than what he's currently spending on a game. And now let's look at 2023. And Spider-Man 2 has cost 300 million. So, that's going between 60 million and 300. And there are a lot of, topics surrounding this cost. And just to look at a few, Alan Wake 2, an amazing game, simply can't break even. Suicide Squad has as many people playing it as people playing Far Cry, a game from 14 years ago. And simply like less than 2 weeks after it's out, Avatar's Frontiers of Pandora is on a high discount. Ubisoft are very tight with their finance numbers, but we can start to guess why. And all of the decisions within Sony that relates to how they operate, they are all affected by the fact that they are operating at a very low margin. So even in their internal financial report, Sony's CEO says that all of the studios have to improve when it comes to how they make games. And even though Sony is the only publisher open about this, we can see the same trend in others. So Microsoft and Redfall and a few other titles as well as anything else going on in the larger studios, we can see that the costs are skyrocketing. And if you're paying attention, between all the layoffs and between all the studio closures, the rhetoric with people in publishing right now, and that's also, speaking from having talked to a lot of publishers over the last 3 years, to get projects funded and so on, is that the way we are going, I don't think that that's how it's going to stay. Which is a good time to get back to the original, the first slide of the presentation, or the final slide of the presentation, which is that I really suspect that game development budgets are about to shrink. So we can't keep up this type of development where, making a brick wall texture takes us 3 days, and making a piece of body armor takes us 25 days. And the same with, all other features within game development. And in every avenue, that the budgets to make games are about to shrink quite a lot. So that means, in terms of specialists, because we will need to have smaller teams, people who specialize, in a very specific field of game development will find it harder to keep up. and people who have a side skill, like a little bit of, be it level design or be it shader knowledge or ways to script or to optimize or even audio, those people will have an easier time getting things done and having successful projects. And the same goes for the pipelines, because when the teams decrease in size and there are less specialists, all of the very complex pipelines that we can have now, which often they're quite hard to explain, and they're quite involved in terms of how every component works with each other, they'll need to get simpler, and they'll need to be able to change things faster, to see results basically more instantaneously. And then there is the second part, which is that I think we will need to focus more on creative development, where publishers probably are going to step back and expect that the freedom they are about to give studios again, which they can clearly see isn't really working, that like this jumping on the bandwagon and making yet another of the same type of project that they've seen on E3 last year, although E3 is now from a bygone era, that this approach isn't working. And I think that publishers in general will slowly, naturally step away from creative development and let developers fail and succeed more on their own merit. And this means that we focus less on the tech, we focus less on things that are easy to scale and size up, and we focus more on finding out what is a good game at all, what is an interesting art style, what is stuff that looks interesting, stuff that we can do, our team can do. So, things like there's quite a few novel games anymore. So we have a few really novel games like, Cuphead, which, let's agree, there's a very specific team behind that game. But in general, that this is the direction that the industry will have to go in to stay alive. And for that reason, you and we need to focus a lot more on actually finding out what's worth making in the first place, not just how can we make it, because slowly the people with ideas, they'll need you as well, not just to execute the ideas, but also to push them forward and to be actively part of it. And that variety, like standing out and being original, not just on the merits of size and scope and scale, this will be important. And what this sounds like is like, that this is all very abstract, but I'd just like to remind you that a lot of great games are made this way, and they're made this way in every genre, all the way from stylized games to co-op games to games made by a small studio or big studio, even what you would call like large budget AAA games. If you look at the ones that are really successful, what they all have in common, and what these games all have in common, is that they reject larger development pipelines, and they simply go for very, very simple and effective ways of getting where they want to be. So they're a little rough around the edges sometimes, but man, they are needed. And all I want is that there should be more of them. And the reason that I'm telling you any of this is that I'm not talking to students or juniors or newcomers to the games industry. So when I talk to you, I see that as talking to the future leads and seniors, principals and directors of the games industry. And that, like if we're going to have a chance at all to turn things around and to set ourselves on a better track, you are the best chance at that. This isn't something that happens overnight. Like it really comes from ideas that form into teams, and teams that form into projects, and it's not something that just happens because we say it. So for me, the best way to address this elephant in the room, like what's gotten us to where we are now, why do we see all this turbulence in the games industry? It's very simply put that the choices that we have made and the way that things have worked have led us here, and to go somewhere else, we have to actually change how we're thinking. So it's a bit more of a long-term topic. And as I said, it's up to you guys to do this, and it's up to me to kind of help you support it, as someone has been part of this for some time. And with that, a very word-heavy presentation, I am done. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming to a very hardcore talk. Thank you for giving it your time. And if you have any questions, I am very, very open to them now.
Thank you so much, Jussi, for your time and this amazing workshop that you shared with us. They are only possible because of the support of our loving community, and I want to thank each and every one of them for making it a thriving place for learning and growth. If you want to join these artists and level up your own environment art skills, then please head on over to beyondexcent.com, where you can become a member of our community, where we offer weekly work reviews, a 250-page book full of tips, portfolio reviews, and more. All of these links can be found in the description down below. So, stay creative, and I hope to see you there.